Why did one small step forward feel louder than gunfire? The checkpoint sat in silence, carved from sun-scorched dirt and half-buried concrete. The horizon rippled with heat, the kind of heat that made distance blur, that bent the outlines of men and machines until they seemed ghost-like. A dog barked faintly somewhere far off, then fell quiet. She stood still, her boots pressed into gravel, dust coating the leather like ash. Her eyes locked on the figure ahead, a guard leaning against the rusted gate, shoulders slouched, rifle slung but untouched. He looked ordinary, just another man at another roadblock. But then he shifted. A single step, small, barely anything. Yet Captain Alina Marlowe felt it thunder through the silence. It wasn't just a movement, it was something else. Something colder, a warning. Her chest tightened, though her expression never changed. Years in uniform had taught her how to keep the outside calm even when the inside trembled. She didn't flinch, didn't even blink. She only let her fingers drift closer to her sidearm, slow and quiet, like dust shifting on stone. Behind her, the squad barely noticed. Ramirez, her team leader, leaned against the convoy vehicle, wiping sweat from his brow. Private Carter fiddled with the strap of his helmet, muttering about the heat. To them, it was just another stop, just another checkpoint on a mission already dragging into overtime. But Alina knew better. There was always something beneath the surface, always something waiting in the silence. The guard's eyes stayed locked on her, not on the convoy, not on her squad, not on the men who filled the air with casual chatter. Just her, a stare unbroken, a line drawn. Her father's words came back to her. Power doesn't always arrive with noise. Sometimes it's the silence before it. She drew in a breath, calm, controlled, but deep inside something coiled tight. This wasn't supposed to be her role today. She was overwatch, quiet, precise, the one in the shadows while others stood in front. But somehow here she was, exposed in the dust, staring at a warning that had no voice. And in that silence, Alina wondered, was this the moment everything would break? Hours earlier, the world had felt different. Back in the operations tent, the air had buzzed with voices, overlapping, colliding. Officers pointing at maps, tracing supply lines with blunt fingers. Men talking over one another as if the louder voice won the ground. Alina had sat at the edge of the table, not silent, not entirely, but unheard. She tried to speak once, pointing out a gap in the intel packet, a detail about the terrain, but three others cut across her, filling the air with confidence. She had swallowed her thought back down. Invisible, that's what she was in those rooms. The sniper, the ghost on the ridge. Reliable, precise, but never central, and part of her hated it. Not the invisibility itself. She'd chosen this role after all, but the way people forgot that even silence carried weight. Now at the checkpoint, it was her silence that spoke loudest. She tilted her head just slightly, studying the guard the way she would a target through glass. Every detail mattered. The stillness of his rifle, too deliberate. The stiffness of his jaw, like someone bracing against something unseen. The way his shadow stretched long in the dying light like it wanted to touch her boots. Ramirez finally noticed her stillness. "You good, Marlowe?" His tone was casual, a shade away from careless. She didn't answer right away, just let her silence linger. The guard pressed his boot deeper into the dirt. Not another step yet, but close, too close. Finally, she whispered, voice low enough only Ramirez would hear. "Tell them to stay sharp." His brow furrowed. "You see something?" No, not something. Everything. The weight of memory, the echo of instincts honed by ghosts. That was the part most people didn't understand about soldiers. They thought it was about firepower, about orders barked and carried out. But the truth, it was about ghosts, about the memories you carried when no one else remembered. She thought of Marjah, the boy, 12 years old, maybe less, running too fast toward the convoy, his hands hidden inside his shirt. She'd been overwatched that day, too. Rifle steady, crosshairs breathing on him. Every nerve had screamed. Her finger had brushed the trigger. and yet she froze. Just 1 second too long. And when the blast tore through the Humvee, her ears had rung for weeks. 3 gone. In her mind, their faces blurred, but the boy's didn't. His eyes were burned into her. She never told anyone she blamed herself. Out loud, they called it the fog of war, an impossible call. But she knew. At night, staring at the ceiling, she knew. And so now, as this guard shifted his weight again, she promised herself she would not freeze. Not this time. The sun sagged lower, painting the sky in tired orange and bruised purple. The air smelled of hot metal, of sweat, of something acrid carried faintly on the wind. Alina adjusted her stance, slow, controlled, nothing to provoke, but every nerve was alive. Behind her, Carter muttered again about the heat. His voice cracked in a way that betrayed nerves he thought he was hiding. She wanted to reassure him, to remind him everyone felt it, but her eyes never left the guard. Another step. Small, barely more than a shuffle, yet it pressed on her chest like a hand. Her hand moved now too, resting on the grip of her sidearm. Not raised, not threatening, just there, a message: I see you, don't push farther. The guard's lips parted. A breath, maybe a word, but nothing came. He only stared. And in that silence, Alina realized the truth. It wasn't about him. It was about what was behind him, what he was blocking, something someone didn't want them to see. Her mind flickered back home. Virginia, her mother in the garden watering rows of tomatoes, hands deep in soil. You could have been a teacher, she'd said once, disapproval softened by love. Alina had no answer, still didn't. But here now, this was her answer, this moment, when silence was heavy and instinct was the only thing between life and loss. She didn't serve for glory, not even for duty, not entirely. She served for this, for the chance to make the small step, the quiet stand that might stop something worse. The convoy waited, engines idling low, a faint hum in the background. Radios buzzed with static. Time stretched thin, every second scraping. Alina tightened her grip, her jaw set. She didn't raise her voice, but her words cut through the air all the same. Ramirez, something's wrong. And though the horizon looked empty, though the checkpoint looked ordinary, though the guard had barely moved, she knew. His step wasn't just movement. It was a warning. The kind you only understood when you'd lived through silence before the blast. And Alina Marlowe was listening. What was hidden behind that single step? The question looped in Alina's mind as if her instincts had already seen something her eyes couldn't. The checkpoint looked unchanged, the guard unmoved now, but her chest still felt that same tightness. She could almost hear the echo of her father's voice again. Listen to the quiet, that's where the truth hides. The squad hadn't caught it yet. They never did at first. Ramirez was still leaning casually against the convoy, scanning the horizon with an expression that said routine. Carter adjusted his helmet strap again, like it was the strap that made him sweat and not the fear underneath. Jensen, the medic, crouched near the back of the vehicle, rubbing at a scar on his arm, the way he did when nerves chewed at him. They trusted Alina to do her job, but they didn't always trust her instincts. Not yet, not the way she did. Her hand tightened around the grip of her sidearm, subtle, almost invisible. A message: I'm ready, don't test me. The guard said nothing. He just stood, eyes locked on her like he was waiting to see if she'd understand. And maybe that was the part that scared her most, that this wasn't defiance, this was warning. But a warning of what? Ramirez finally pushed off the convoy and walked closer to her. His boots crunched gravel, breaking the silence that had stretched too long. He didn't whisper this time. He spoke low but firm. Marlowe, talk to me. What do you see? She wanted to say she saw everything. She wanted to tell him about the memory of Marjah, about the ghost of hesitation that still burned her chest. She wanted to say that her gut was screaming louder than her eyes. Instead, she only said, "He's stalling." Ramirez frowned. Stalling for what? Alina didn't answer, because she didn't know yet. The air felt heavier, thicker, as if the heat itself pressed against her skin. She studied the horizon again, her sniper's eye trained to catch movement where others saw nothing. The brush of light on metal, the flick of shadow against sand, the ripple of something wrong. But there was nothing, nothing visible. Yet every nerve told her something was waiting. That was when she heard it. Not with her ears, not exactly. It was more like the memory of sound, a faint hum, metallic, faint, almost drowned out by the convoy's engines, but it was there. She turned her head slightly, scanning the ridge that ran parallel to the road. Nothing, rocks, heat shimmer, empty. But she'd learned long ago that empty didn't mean safe. Her pulse ticked higher. She thought about her sister, the one person she hadn't spoken to in months. The last phone call had ended in silence after an argument neither of them knew how to solve. "You're chasing shadows," her sister had said. "Why do you always choose war over family?" Maybe her sister was right. Maybe this life was chasing shadows, but if Alina didn't, who would? The faint hum came again, longer this time, just enough for her to know it wasn't memory, it was real. She didn't realize she'd spoken until the words were out. "Drones." Ramirez stiffened. "Where?" Her jaw locked. "Can't see them yet, but they're here." The squad shifted. Carter swore under his breath. Jensen muttered something about bad feelings. Ramirez raised a fist to signal the rest of the convoy. Engines dimmed. The air grew stiller, quieter, every soldier's breath sharp and shallow. Alina stepped forward just one pace, closing the space between her and the guard. His eyes flickered just for a second when she said the word drones. Confirmation. She didn't blink, didn't move farther, but inside the coil of tension wound tighter. She whispered, so low Ramirez barely caught it. "He knows." What haunted Alina in moments like this wasn't fear of death. She had accepted that long ago. It was the fear of being wrong, of pulling the trigger when she shouldn't, of freezing when she shouldn't, of living with the aftermath. Her mind replayed Marjah again, the boy, the blast, the screams. She forced the image down, buried it. Not now, not this time. The guard's lips parted again, but still no words came. Just the faintest twitch, like he wanted to say something but couldn't. And then she realized he wasn't the enemy. He was the warning. But warning them of what? The faint hum grew louder now. No longer a whisper, but a thread of sound woven through the silence, coming from above the ridge, from somewhere they couldn't see. Carter pointed. "I don't wait there." Alina followed his hand. A glint just for a second, metal catching light, then gone. Her pulse slammed against her ribs. This wasn't an ordinary checkpoint. This was bait. Ramirez swore under his breath. Ambush. The word cut through the squad like shrapnel. Every man tensed. Fingers tightened on weapons. Eyes scanned the ridges, the shadows, the horizon. But Alina's eyes never left the guard. Because he still hadn't moved. He hadn't raised his rifle. He hadn't called out. He was just standing there, staring at her, silent, as if begging her to understand. And she did. He was caught in the middle, forced to play a role he didn't choose. The step he'd taken wasn't defiance. It was the only way he could scream, "Don't go forward." Her throat tightened. The instinct to raise her weapon warred with the instinct to lower it. She could feel Ramirez waiting for her call. The squad trusted her eye now, even if they didn't always say it out loud. And here she was again, on the edge of choice. "What if I'm wrong?" The ghosts whispered. The boy's eyes stared back at her. "What if I freeze?" Her chest rose, fell, slowly. She swallowed the fear, the doubt, the weight of hesitation. Then she spoke, quiet, firm. "Fall back now." Ramirez blinked. "Marlo." "Do it." Her tone left no room. The convoy reversed. Engines roared back to life. Tires ground against gravel. Soldiers kept their weapons up, scanning every angle. And then it happened. The hum erupted into a buzz. Metal shapes tore from the ridge drones, black and sharp, rising like hornets from a nest. Half a dozen, maybe more, wings slicing air, eyes glowing red in the dusk. Carter cursed loud. Jensen ducked instinctively. Ramirez shouted orders. But Alina didn't move. Her eyes stayed locked on the guard. He still hadn't raised his weapon. He still hadn't called out. He just stood, frozen between two worlds. And in that frozen silence, she understood. That single step forward had been the only thing he could do to warn them. The most powerful warning he could give. Engines roared harder as the convoy pulled back, dust clouding the air. The drones buzzed closer, their hum turning into a scream. The guard didn't move, not even when the first drone dove. Alina finally raised her weapon, not at him, not at the drones, not yet, but ready, steady. Her heart pounded, not with panic, with something else. Resolve. Because now she knew the truth. They weren't just fighting an enemy. They were caught in the crossfire of something bigger. And Alina Marlowe was determined. This time she would not freeze. Why didn't the guard move, even as the swarm rose from the ridge? The thought cut through Alina's chest as sharp as the buzzing of the drones filling the air. Her squad scattered into positions, weapons raised, shouts echoing against the concrete of the checkpoint. Dust kicked up in angry spirals as the convoy reversed harder, engines straining under urgency. But the guard, he remained frozen. No call, no shot, no scramble, just stillness as though rooted to the earth. Alina's rifle was up now, her cheek pressed against the stock. The reticle danced across the first drone, diving low, red eye glowing like a coal. She could squeeze. She could drop it before it reached them. Every instinct screamed for action. But she didn't fire. Not yet. Because a question clawed at her deeper than the urgency of combat. Why would a man stand still in the middle of his own ambush? Ramirez barked over comms. Marlowe, pick him off, take the lead. His voice cracked like a whip, sharp with command. Normally she'd obey instantly, but her finger hovered on the trigger, unmoving. The drone zipped closer, a blur of black metal. Wind from its wings whipped at her face, grit stinging her cheek. Still she held steady, waiting, watching. And in that pause she caught it, the faintest twitch in the guard's jaw. His lips moved barely. No sound, but the shape of the word was clear. Go. Her stomach clenched. He wasn't their enemy, he was their hostage. The first drone cut low, too close. Alina exhaled and squeezed. The shot cracked, sharp, echoing like a thunderclap. The drone's eye shattered, sparks spitting as its body twisted into the dirt. The squad cheered briefly. Carter's voice rang out, "Nice shot, Marlowe." But the celebration evaporated as the rest of the swarm screamed louder, tightening their descent. 6, 7, maybe more, circling like predators testing prey. Ramirez's voice came again, urgent. "We don't have time, drop them." Alina lined up another shot, fired. Metal crumpled midair, another drone spiraled down, but her eye flicked back always to the guard. He hadn't moved. And that stillness scared her more than the machine screaming above. Jensen crouched beside the vehicle, dragging Carter down with him. "Cover left flank," he shouted. Sweat streaked his dirt-stained face, his hands trembling as he slapped a fresh mag into his rifle. Carter's young voice cracked. "What if they don't think, just shoot?" Jensen's words were clipped, heavy with the kind of fear only medics carried, the fear of knowing exactly how bodies break. Alina heard them, but their voices blurred. She was listening for something else. The guard's silence. That single step forward earlier, it wasn't aggression. It was warning. His lips now shaping go, that was desperation. But why? Her breath came shallow, eyes darting between reticle and man, machine and mystery. She fired again. Another drone fell. Ramirez shouted, "Nice work, Marlowe, keep it up." But her chest still ached. Because no matter how many drones she dropped, She couldn't shake the truth gnawing at her gut. This was more than an ambush. She remembered her father's funeral, the silence there. Not the bugle, not the rifles fired in salute, but the silence afterward. The silence of men who didn't know what to say to a girl who'd lost her anchor. This felt like that. The silence before something worse. The swarm pressed closer. Bullets cracked from her squad's rifles, flashes strobing against the fading light. The air stank of cordite and oil, heat shimmering with every blast. One drone exploded against the road, fire licking black smoke into the sky. But the rest didn't break. They circled tighter, forcing the convoy back into tighter formation, hurting them. Elena's mind clicked through possibilities. Hurting to what? Toward where? Her gut sank. She pulled the scope up higher, scanning past the drones. The ridge, the horizon, shadows. There just a flicker, shapes against the sun. Too organized to be rocks, too still to be nature. Men. Waiting. Her throat went dry. Ramirez, she called out louder now, voice hard. They're driving us back toward the ridge. He cursed it into comms. Confirm. Confirmed, they're waiting up there. The radio filled with static, then his breath. Heavy, calculated. Hold position, he said finally. We stand our ground. The words pressed against her ribs. Hold position. But if they held, they'd be pinned. And the guard he had known. Her eyes flicked to him again. He hadn't moved even as bullets cracked past. Not a flinch, not a twitch. Just those eyes fixed on her, carrying weight heavier than the storm around them. She exhaled slow, and in that exhale she made a choice. She spoke not to Ramirez, not to the squad, but to herself. Not again. She shifted, adjusting her angle, scope climbing higher toward the ridge. The first man came into view, rifle braced, face wrapped in cloth. Then another. Then three more. Her pulse kicked. The drones weren't the real attack. They were the push. The ridge was the kill zone. She fired, one man dropped. Another ducked, scrambling. Shouts echoed across the ridge, faint but sharp. Ramirez's voice snapped through comms. Marlo, what the hell are you? They're on the ridge, she cut in. I'm not letting them box us in. For a beat, silence. Then Ramirez again, rough, reluctant. Copy, shift, fire. The squad turned, rifles barking toward the horizon. The drones still circled, but now fire split both directions. The air filled with chaos, metal and flesh colliding in sound and smoke. And through it all, Elena's eyes stayed on the guard. Still unmoving, still staring. Her chest tightened. She wanted to save him, to pull him out, to drag him into the convoy, to tell him I understood. But she couldn't, not now. And maybe he knew that. Maybe that's why he hadn't begged. Because his warning wasn't meant for him. It was meant for her. Jensen shouted over the noise. 2 down left. Carter, keep your fire steady. Carter's shots cracked uneven, fear bleeding into every squeeze. He wasn't a machine. None of them were. He was a kid trying to live through the longest seconds of his life. Elena wanted to call to him, to remind him fear was human, that it didn't make him weak. But her mouth stayed shut, eyes pressed to glass, trigger breaking again. 1-2, another figure on the ridge crumpled. The drones screamed closer now, too many for them to hold off. Her squad was good, trained, but this wasn't balance, this was design. Someone wanted them swallowed. And she had to decide if they would be. Her radio crackled, Ramirez's voice came harsh. Marlo, we can't hold, give me options. Her throat tightened. She was the sniper, not the commander. She wasn't supposed to call plays, but right now, instinct weighed more than rank. She scanned fast, eyes darting over terrain. The ridge to the left too steep. Right open field, no cover, behind trapped, forward the guard, the checkpoint. And maybe, just maybe, something beyond him. Her stomach twisted. Forward was suicide, unless. She looked at the guard one last time. His lips moved again, that same word. Go. Her heart pounded. She made the call. Forward, we push through the checkpoint. Ramirez barked, are you out of your? It's the only way, she snapped. If we stay, we're dead. If we retreat, they cut us down. Forward's the only gap. Silent, just gunfire, drones, shouts. Then Ramirez's voice, hard as iron. Copy, forward it is. Engines roared, tires spun. The convoy lunged forward, tearing through dust and fire. Bullets sparked against metal, drones screaming overhead. Alina moved with them, step by step, every shot deliberate, carving holes in the ridge as they surged. The guard didn't move. He just stood still as stone, watching them come. And in that frozen stare, Alina felt it again. This wasn't the end. This was only the beginning. How could silence inside a hallway feel heavier than artillery fire? She leaned against the cold wall, rifle strapped, helmet tilted slightly forward, listening. It wasn't the kind of listening you did with ears alone. It was deeper, a quiet attunement to the way the air itself shifted. Every footstep, every cough, every uncertain pause in the corridor ahead felt amplified in that tense silence. But it was the absence of noise that pressed hardest. The kind of absence that suggested someone was waiting, hidden, just beyond the corner. Her team stood a few meters behind. The corporal rubbed his hands together, a nervous tic he hadn't been able to shake since deployment. The medic checked his pack again and again, as though extra glances could create supplies that weren't there. She glanced back at them, just long enough to catch the flicker of humanity in their eyes. Fear, hope, fatigue. She wanted to tell them she understood. She wanted to admit she was afraid too, but leaders in these moments don't speak with words. They speak with motion. She stepped forward. One small, deliberate step into the unknown. It wasn't dramatic. No shouting, no signal, just a shift of weight, boot to ground, steady and unbroken. But the effect was immediate. The others straightened. Their hands steadied. The corporal stopped rubbing his palms. The medic finally let the zipper of his bag go. Sometimes, one person's composure is enough to silence a storm inside others. Still inside, her heart wasn't quiet. Because she remembered a hallway like this before, years back, in another city, another life. That time she hadn't stepped forward. Someone else had, and he hadn't returned. Her brother. The memory was jagged, incomplete. They'd never recovered his body, just fragments of radio chatter and then the sudden drop into static. She hadn't told the others that part of her story. She didn't want pity. She didn't want whispers behind her back. But the truth was, every hallway since then had felt haunted. Every shadow carried the possibility of being the last thing she saw. The corridor stretched ahead, dim and narrow, pipes hissing softly against concrete. The smell of rust and damp air clung to her throat. She adjusted her breathing, slowed it until it matched her steps. Her earpiece crackled, clear so far. She pressed her lips against the mic, whispering, "Hold, movement possible." She didn't say she sensed it more than she saw it. She didn't say the silence felt deliberate. She moved again, another step forward, deliberate, unhurried. And that was when she caught it, the faint scrape of something metallic being dragged lightly against stone. Not close, not far, just ahead. Her hand lifted, fist closed, stop. Her team froze behind her. In the silence, she thought of home, of a window she used to sit by as a child, watching rain slide down the glass, trying to guess which drop would reach the bottom first. Simple, meaningless games. The kind of quiet moments war steals from you. She wondered if she would ever sit by that window again. The scrape came again, louder now, not random, rhythmic. And then it stopped. She felt the weight of decision pressing. Step forward and risk whatever waited. Hold position and let fear eat away at the team behind her. There was no manual for these moments. No training scenario could tell you what was right. It was instinct, conviction, and sometimes desperation. Her throat tightened. She lifted her rifle, aimed steady down the dark corridor, and whispered to herself, not a prayer, not a plea, but a memory: don't freeze. Not again. Not this time. So she moved. Her boots were soundless against the concrete, each step balanced, her rifle tight against her shoulder. The corridor narrowed, the shadows deepened. For a moment she thought she saw a flicker of motion at the far end, or maybe it was her mind playing tricks. Her team waited behind, breaths held. They would follow her lead no matter what. She turned the corner, and there finally a shape. Not hostile, not armed, a child. Thin, trembling, eyes wide like dark glass reflecting light. Dust clung to the boy's face, streaked with sweat. His small hand clutched a piece of metal, dragging it slowly across the wall, the source of the sound. Her chest tightened. She lowered her weapon slowly, carefully. The boy flinched at the movement, shrinking back. "Easy," she whispered. Not for the boy, for herself. For the ghosts of her brother, for the fractured weight of years. The medic behind her exhaled, almost too loudly. Relief. But her eyes stayed sharp because something about the boy's stance wasn't just fear. It was warning. His gaze kept flicking to the ceiling, then back at her, as though trying to tell her something without words. And then she heard it, a faint hum above. Not electricity, not water, something heavier, mechanical. Her stomach dropped. A trap. The boy wasn't dragging the metal to make noise. He was signaling her, trying to warn them without speaking. She reacted on instinct. Back, everyone back now. The team scrambled, boots pounding against concrete. She grabbed the boy, pulling him against her chest as she sprinted for cover. A second later, the ceiling erupted. Concrete dust fell like ash, a roar filling the corridor, heat and pressure slamming through the air. Her ears rang, the boy's scream muffled against her shoulder. She staggered, shielded him, felt shards graze her arms. Silence followed, heavy, choking. She coughed, blinking through the haze. The team was alive, shaken but upright. No casualties, not this time. Her arms tightened around the boy. He buried his face into her vest, trembling. And in that moment she wasn't a soldier, wasn't a leader, wasn't even her brother's grieving shadow. She was just human, a protector. But deep down she knew this was only the beginning. Whoever set the trap wasn't done, and the boy wasn't safe. Not here, not anywhere near this collapsing corridor. Still, for the first time in years, she felt something unexpected. Hope. Because when he looked up at her through the dust and fear, his eyes said what words couldn't. You stepped forward. You saved me. Why did the boy's eyes look older than his years? She sat him down on a cracked bench against the corridor wall, dust still hanging in the air like mist after a storm. He didn't speak, not a word, but his silence carried more weight than a battlefield roar. The team gathered, coughing out the grit from their throats. The corporal muttered, "That was too close." His hands trembled, though he tried to hide it. The medic knelt near the boy, offering water from his canteen. The boy didn't take it. He just stared. Her own hands were still tight on the rifle, though she wasn't aiming. Her knuckles ached from the grip. She forced her fingers to loosen. Who had set that trap? Why use a child as the signal? And why was he still looking at her like she had a question to answer? The air tasted like burnt concrete and iron. She wiped dust from her brow, sweat streaking the grime. "Ma'am," the corporal whispered, stepping closer, "what do we do with him?" She glanced at the boy. He couldn't have been more than 9, maybe 10. Too small for this ruin of a place, too quiet for a child. "We don't leave him," she said. The words left her mouth before she even thought them through. The corporal frowned. "He'll slow us down." "Then we move slower," she said, sharper this time. The medic looked relieved. The corporal looked frustrated, but she didn't care. Something about the boy, the way he'd risked making noise, dragging metal on stone to warn them, had already cut into her. Trust wasn't cheap here, and yet he'd given it in silence. Her chest tightened again, memory flashing. Her brother's last words to her before he vanished into radio static: "Protect who you can, even if it costs you." She pushed the memory down. She couldn't afford to crumble, not now. The boy tugged at her sleeve suddenly, small fingers brushing fabric. He pointed down the corridor, toward a stairwell leading deeper underground. His eyes flicked back up to hers, urgent. "Why there?" she asked softly, knowing he wouldn't answer. Still, the way he pointed wasn't random. It was firm, certain, like he knew something. The team exchanged uneasy looks. The corporal muttered again, "Could be a trap." She studied the boy. Dust in his hair, a thin scar running just above his eyebrow, his jaw set tight like he'd had to grow up too fast. He didn't look like a lure. He looked like someone trying to survive. Finally she nodded, "We follow." The stairwell was steep, the air cooler as they descended. The concrete smelled of mold and wet iron. Every step echoed, bouncing off the walls, magnified by the weight of uncertainty. Her thoughts wouldn't quiet. Why was she trusting him? Why did her chest ache every time she looked at him? Was it just guilt stitched to the memory of her brother, or something deeper? At the bottom of the stairs, the boy stopped. He pressed his hand against the wall, tapping 3 times, then paused, then 2 more. A rhythm, a signal. Her stomach tightened. He knew something. A moment later, faint tapping answered back from the other side of the wall. The corporal froze. "There are more." Her pulse surged. More survivors or more danger? The boy looked at her, eyes wide, pleading. Not asking permission, demanding trust. She placed a hand on the wall, listened. The tapping came again, weak, slow, almost desperate. It wasn't code, she knew, but it wasn't random. Someone was alive back there. The medic whispered, "If they're trapped." She cut him off, "We get them out." The corporal shook his head. "Ma'am, this isn't our mission. Our orders are." "Orders don't matter if people die here tonight," she said, her voice steady but sharp enough to cut. Her own words shocked her. She'd always prided herself on discipline, on never letting emotion override command. But here she was, arguing with instinct instead of the chain of command. The corporal clenched his jaw, but didn't argue further. They set to work, using rifle butts, knives, anything they had to chip at the wall. Dust filled the air, coating tongues and throats. Every strike was louder than the last. Every second stretched longer. She thought of her brother again. Buried somewhere in rubble like this, no one coming for him. Was this her way of making amends? Too late for him, but not too late for these people. The boy knelt beside her, his small hands pressing against the stone, as though his touch alone could weaken it. Finally the wall cracked, a slab gave way, and behind it faces. 3 of them, gaunt, hollow-eyed but alive. A woman clutching her daughter, an older man whose hands shook as he reached through the gap. Tears streaked the dirt on their faces. The boy reached for them, fingers trembling. The woman gasped, pulling him through the gap, clutching him tight. Her son. Her chest tightened again, but differently this time. Relief, the kind that made her throat sting. The woman whispered words in a language she didn't know, but the meaning was clear. Gratitude, desperation, love. The boy buried his face in his mother's shoulder, but his eyes flicked back to the soldier, just for a moment, silent, powerful. She lowered her rifle and exhaled slowly. For once, the war outside the walls didn't matter. What mattered was here, flesh, bone, connection. But the moment didn't last. A distant rumble shook the floor, then another, louder, closer. The corporal's head snapped up. They're moving in. Someone knows we're here. Her relief twisted into dread. By saving these people, had she doomed her team? The older man behind the wall gestured frantically deeper inside, pointing to a tunnel leading further underground. "Ma'am," the corporal started. She cut him off again, firm. "We move now." The team hustled, guiding the survivors through the gap, into the tunnel. The boy's small hand slipped back into hers for a moment, just before the darkness swallowed them all. Her grip tightened, then loosened. She knew it couldn't last, but in that fragile second of contact, she felt something she hadn't in years. Belief. Not in orders, not in the mission, but in why she was still here, still fighting, still stepping forward when the world demanded she stay back. And in the echoing dark, as boots pounded and rumble above grew closer, she whispered to herself the truth she could never say out loud. This is why I came back. This is why I can't stop. What does it mean to lead when every step forward feels like gambling with lives? The tunnel stretched endlessly, damp air clinging to their skin, each breath echoing louder than it should. The survivors stumbled behind her team, exhausted but pushing forward, fear driving their feet as much as hope. The boy clung to his mother's hand now, but every so often he glanced back at the soldier, as if to make sure she was still there. She noticed, and though she never let her face show it, that look carried weight, too much weight. The corporal moved up beside her, voice low, urgent. "Ma'am, with respect, we can't keep doing this. We're carrying civilians through a combat zone. No comms, low supplies. We'll all burn out before we get clear." She didn't look at him. She kept her eyes forward, scanning the flickering light that barely reached the tunnel's end. "Would you leave them?" she asked quietly. The corporal hesitated, his breath catching. Then softer, "I'd survive." His words cut deep because they weren't cruel. They were honest. Survival was the first instinct. She knew it too well. She had lived through missions where she'd chosen survival over impossible rescue, and those choices still haunted her. Faces she could never forget. She tightened her jaw. "We're not leaving them." The corporal didn't argue again, but she could feel the frustration radiating from him. It wasn't disobedience. It was fear disguised as anger. She understood it because it lived in her too. The medic moved quietly between survivors, checking their wounds with gentle hands. He whispered to the little girl, gave her a cracked energy bar, broke it in half so her mother could eat too. For a brief moment, she saw a flicker of something she hadn't felt in hours: humanity untouched by war. The older man limped badly. Each step seemed like agony. The corporal finally slung the man's arm across his shoulder, muttering under his breath, but he didn't let him fall behind. Action spoke where words failed. And all the while, her thoughts spun back to her brother. He would have done the same. He would have carried strangers on his back if it meant they had a chance. That was who he was, reckless with compassion. It was what had gotten him killed. And here she was, walking the same road, making the same choices. Was this bravery, or weakness dressed in moral armor? The tunnel widened, opening into a cavernous underground space, an old maintenance hub with rusted machines and broken pipes jutting like bones from the walls. The survivors gasped softly at the sudden space, the dim glow of emergency lights casting eerie shadows. But her focus snapped upward, because the air carried a different vibration here. A low hum, machinery alive, not broken, active. She raised a hand, halting the group. The boy froze instantly, his eyes wide again. His instincts were sharp, almost too sharp for a child. She caught herself wondering, what had he seen? What had he lived through already that made silence more natural to him than laughter? She moved forward alone, boots careful on the graded floor. The hum grew louder, more distinct. Generators, and not old ones. Someone had been here recently. Then she saw it, markings on the wall, fresh, not graffiti, military. Her breath caught. Not theirs. The enemy had been here, maybe still was. She signaled her team. The corporal swore under his breath. The medic's jaw clenched tight. The survivors just looked around, confused, scared, trusting without knowing what shadows surrounded them. She motioned them into cover, behind machinery, in alcoves of crumbling stone. The boy pressed against his mother, but his eyes stayed locked on the soldier. He trusted her more than safety itself. That weight pressed harder on her chest. The hum deepened, footsteps joined it, distant, echoing boots. The corporal mouthed, "We can't fight them all." He was right. They were low on ammo, outnumbered, burdened with civilians. If they engaged here, it would end fast, and badly. Her mind raced. She couldn't go back, the tunnels behind were compromised. Couldn't go forward blindly, not with survivors in tow. Then she noticed something. The boy, he wasn't panicking, he wasn't frozen like the others. He was watching the shadows, listening. And then he pointed not forward, not back. Sideways, toward a smaller service duct half hidden by debris. The corporal frowned, too small. The boy shook his head, urgent. He tapped the soldier's arm, then the duct, then his chest, then hers. Her heart stuttered. He wanted her to trust him again. "Ma'am, we can't," the corporal started. But she cut him off. "We try." The duct was narrow, but it led somewhere. The survivors crawled first, guided by the medic. The corporal followed, muttering curses under his breath but not resisting. She went last, making sure no one was left behind, every muscle tense with the sound of boots and voices drawing closer in the cavern behind them. The duct scraped her shoulders, cold and damp, every inch forward a struggle. Her rifle dragged awkwardly against the walls. Sweat slicked her palms. The air was suffocating, thick with dust and metal. But forward was the only option. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the duct spat them out into another chamber, smaller but with an opening above. A ladder, a way up. The survivors stumbled to their feet, gasping. The little girl clung to her mother, crying softly now. The medic murmured comfort. The corporal checked ammo again, his face pale but composed. She lifted her gaze to the ladder, the dim circle of light far above. Freedom or another trap? She didn't know. But when the boy tugged her sleeve again, pointing upward, she didn't hesitate. She slung her rifle, steadied herself, and began the climb. Every rung creaked. Every pull of her arms felt like lifting the weight of everyone below her. Sweat dripped into her eyes. Her muscles burned, but she kept moving. Halfway up, she paused, looked down. The survivors watched her. The boy's eyes shone, waiting, believing. She swallowed hard and climbed higher. At the top, she pressed against the hatch. Russ groaned. For a moment, it didn't budge. Panic rose in her throat. What if it was sealed? What if she'd led them into a dead end? She forced her weight against it. The hatch gave way. Cool night air poured in. Stars. For the first time in hours, she saw the open sky. She pulled herself out, scanning quickly. They were outside the city now, on the edge of a crumbled field, distant fires smoldering on the horizon. The night was quiet, eerily so. She motioned the others up, one by one, pulling survivors into the open air. The boy emerged last, his small hand gripping hers as she lifted him out. They stood together under the stars, dust and sweat streaking their faces, lungs filling with air that didn't taste of concrete and iron. Relief washed through her, but it was fragile because she knew the silence wouldn't last. The enemy would come, and she would have to decide again how far she was willing to step forward and how much of herself she was willing to lose in the process. For now, though, she let herself look at the sky, at the stars that had guided her brother once and that now somehow had guided her here. And when the boy's small voice finally broke the silence, whispering just one word, "safe," she almost couldn't breathe. She crouched, met his eyes, and spoke softly, firmly, as much for herself as for him. "For now, how do you carry yourself when you know the end is near, but you refuse to let it look like defeat?" She straightened her back, though her body screamed with exhaustion. The storm had broken into a gray drizzle, fine drops clinging to her lashes. Every breath came with the weight of everything she had seen, everything she had carried silently while others looked to her as if she were unshakable. But even she knew that one wrong step could undo all of it. The perimeter was quiet, too quiet. Not the kind of quiet that calmed nerves, but the kind that pressed against the skin like an unseen hand. Somewhere beyond the fog, movement shifted. Not fast, not reckless, but steady. Someone or something was watching. She glanced at the men beside her. One leaned against a wall, fumbling nervously with the strap of his rifle. Another tried to light a damp cigarette, failing 3 times before giving up, his shoulders collapsing under an invisible weight. Each of them had their flaws, their fears, their doubts, but tonight she was their anchor, and that terrified her more than the enemy waiting outside. Why was it always the quiet ones who carried the loudest burdens? She adjusted her grip on the rifle. Her finger brushed against the worn groove where the paint had chipped away, her pulse sinking with the metal. That rifle wasn't just a weapon. It was history, hers, their squads, the fallen who had once held it. It had lived through stories of bravery and mistakes alike. It reminded her of the first time she had fired a shot in combat, hands trembling, ears ringing long after the echo faded. She had grown since then, but that echo never left her. It stayed like a ghost, reminding her what it cost to survive. "Ma'am," one of the younger soldiers whispered. His voice was barely a thread. "Do you think we'll make it through the night?" She didn't answer right away. She could have said yes. She could have lied, as many leaders before her had done to keep morale afloat. But she had learned something over the years. False hope was as dangerous as despair. She turned her head slowly, her eyes locking onto his. "We'll make every second count," she said softly. It wasn't a promise of survival. It was a promise of purpose. And in that moment the boy nodded, shoulders straightening just enough to show he understood. But deep down, she wondered if he truly believed her, or if he just needed to believe in something, anything, to hold on. The drizzle thickened into rain again, the droplets striking the metal roof above them like a drumbeat. The sound masked smaller noises, the scuff of boots, the click of safety catches being released in the distance. The enemy was closer than they wanted to believe. She could feel it in her bones, the way animals sense the ground trembling before an earthquake. She stepped forward, just 1 pace beyond the others. It was instinct, but also something more. A declaration, a warning. Her boots sank into the mud with a weight that didn't belong to her alone. It carried the memory of those who had fallen and the silent plea of those who stood behind her. And whoever waited in the fog would feel it. The others didn't speak. They didn't need to. That single step forward shifted something in the air, an unspoken signal, a silent promise. If you come closer, you'll have to go through me first. She thought about her sister. Strange how memories bled through in the worst moments. She hadn't spoken to her in years. The fight had been petty, childish even, about responsibility and choices. Yet now, standing in the cold mud with her life dangling by a thread, she would have given anything just to hear her sister's voice again. To say one simple word, sorry. But war had a cruel way of stealing tomorrows, and sometimes you didn't get the chance to make things right. She closed her eyes for half a breath, letting the rain wash across her face, masking the single tear she couldn't stop. When she opened them, her gaze sharpened again. The mission demanded it. The people behind her deserved it. The fog shifted. A dark silhouette emerged, slow, deliberate, testing the line. Her breath caught, but she didn't raise her weapon yet. Sometimes silence spoke louder than bullets. She simply stood there, her eyes fixed, her presence unyielding. The figure stopped. For a long, unbearable moment no one moved. The rain drummed, hearts thundered, time stretched. Then the figure retreated into the mist. A collective exhale rippled through the squad, but she didn't let herself relax. This wasn't over. That step forward had bought them a pause, but not peace. And pauses could be more dangerous than firefights. Her thoughts drifted again, unbidden, to the letter she carried in her pocket. The one she had written months ago but never sent. Words scratched onto paper by the light of a single lantern. About fear, about loneliness, about the guilt of carrying men home in silence, wrapped in flags instead of laughter. She kept it folded, unread by anyone but her, a confession she wasn't brave enough to share. If she didn't make it through tonight, that letter might be the only piece of her story left behind. But was that enough? Did paper and ink truly capture the weight of everything she had lived, the faces she remembered, the small victories that no history book would bother to mention? The rain thickened, hammering the ground. The fog closed in tighter. Somewhere in the distance, a signal flare hissed upward, painting the sky red for a brief, blinding instant. They were coming. And she, soaked to the bone, weary yet unbroken, took another step forward. Not for herself. For them. What do you leave behind when words fail, when the fight is over, and silence is all that remains? The rain had stopped, but the ground still carried its scars. Pools of water reflected the dim glow of lanterns, rippling each time a boot pressed too close. She stood at the edge of the perimeter, her uniform heavy, her shoulders aching. The night had not broken her, but it had taken something she would never get back. The others whispered in clusters, some laughing nervously, others sitting with blank stares, hands trembling around tin mugs of coffee they couldn't finish. Relief and grief blended together in strange ways, like two rivers meeting but refusing to mix. She stayed apart, watching, listening, breathing. And for the first time in hours, there was no movement in the fog. She had expected another wave, another test, but instead, nothing. Whoever had been out there had felt her line, had seen her step forward and decided against pushing further. It wasn't victory, not in the way command might measure it. It was something smaller, quieter. A warning exchanged without bullets. She lowered herself onto a crate, boots sinking deeper into the mud. Her body begged for rest, but her mind refused to let go. Images replayed, the shadow in the mist, the boy's trembling question, the letter still folded in her pocket. The letter. Her fingers brushed against it, soaked and softened by the storm, edges frayed. She thought of opening it, maybe even reading it aloud. But who would she read it to? Would the words matter now after everything? She unfolded it anyway, smoothing the paper with care. The ink had bled in places, but the meaning was still there. She whispered the first line under her breath. I'm tired of pretending I don't feel fear. The words were barely audible, carried away by the damp night air, but saying them gave her something no bullet or metal ever had: honesty. For a moment, she wasn't the unshakable figure, the silent guard, the shield others leaned on. She was just herself, flawed, afraid, human. And yet still standing. A sound broke the stillness. Not boots, not weapons. A laugh. One of the men had started telling a story, something about his daughter, drawing a picture of him as a superhero. His voice cracked halfway through, but the others laughed anyway, the sound desperate but real. She smiled faintly. These were the fragments war was made of, not glory, not strategy, just small moments of survival stitched together by people clinging to hope in the dark. Her smile faded as her gaze drifted back toward the fog. Somewhere out there the enemy waited, watching, wondering, and maybe, just maybe, fearing, because they had seen her step forward. They had seen what silence could carry. It wasn't about strength, it was about resolve. She thought of the boy again, his question still echoing. Do you think we'll make it through the night? The truth, she didn't know. No one ever really did. War wasn't about guarantees. It was about choices. And tonight she had chosen to stand, to take one step forward when retreat would have been easier. Maybe that was all survival really meant. She folded the letter again, tucking it back into her pocket. Not yet. The world wasn't ready for her confessions, or maybe she wasn't ready to let them go. Her eyes scanned the horizon one last time. The mist was thinning, dawn was near. With it would come new orders, new trials, new losses, but also new chances, to protect, to endure, to remind those around her that dignity didn't need fanfare. Sometimes it was as simple as standing your ground. She rose slowly, knees stiff, body aching, and walked back toward the others. They turned to her instinctively like plants reaching for light. She said nothing. She didn't need to. Her presence was enough. As the first pale light of morning touched the field, the night's terror faded into memory. But the silence of her warning step, the moment when she had declared, without words, that she would not yield, lingered in every heart present. And though history might forget the storm, the mud, the fear, those who stood with her that night would never forget her silence. Because sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts. She stood there, framed by the breaking dawn, a figure carved from resilience and sacrifice. And the world, for just a breath, seemed to pause in reverence. The war would continue, the losses would come, but in that stillness, in that